You ever get the feeling that your life is running suspiciously smooth, like the universe is just waiting to drop an anvil on your head? That was me, one Tuesday morning, standing barefoot on our porch with a cup of coffee and the vague suspicion that someone, somewhere, had filed a complaint about the way I blinked too loudly. Enter Maggie Hartwell, HOA president, professional clipboard wielder, possibly the final boss in a suburban-themed video game. To be fair, we'd known trouble was brewing since we bought the corner lot in Maple Grove Estates, a development so sterile and aggressively beige, you'd think God himself had signed off on the HOA regulations. But it wasn't until Maggie locked eyes on my wife's Honda Civic that we truly felt the wrath of someone with both too much free time and a dangerous misunderstanding of authority. Let me paint you a picture of Margaret Maggie Hartwell, 52 years old, eternally clad in khaki slacks and a navy blazer that screamed, "I'm here to enforce consequences." She had the overconfidence of someone who once audited a law class on YouTube and now believed she was a one-woman judicial branch. You know the type. She refers to her porch as the command center and probably owns a taser with the safety off. She had been HOA president for 3 years straight. Not because she was competent, mind you, but because nobody else wanted the job. Imagine volunteering to be universally disliked, then doing it enthusiastically. Anyway, Tuesday, the day it all began. My wife Sarah, state attorney, destroyer of nonsense, and undisputed queen of my heart, was rushing out the door for work. She kissed me goodbye, spilled a little coffee on her blouse, and muttered something about finally wrapping this damn embezzlement case. She wasn't exactly focused on her parking technique. Her rear bumper may extended 6 inches past the very end of our driveway. We're talking the automotive equivalent of leaving your pinky toe over the line at a crosswalk. Nothing even a mildly disgruntled mail carrier would notice. Except Maggie. I saw her the moment Sarah pulled out. There she was, across the street, holding her clipboard like a medieval scroll and glaring at our house with all the subtlety of a fire alarm. Her pupils practically dilated when she spotted that rear bumper breach. She sniffed drama in the air, and by God, she was going to feast. The click-click-click of her sensible flats against the pavement sent a chill down my spine. She moved with the grim determination of someone who had been waiting her entire life for a parking infraction worthy of litigation. "Excuse me," she bellowed before she even hit the sidewalk. "Sir, I need to speak with you immediately." I opened the front door, still holding my mug that proudly read World's Okayest Husband, and forced a smile that said, "Please don't ruin my Tuesday." "Maggie," I said, "how's it going?" Her eyes narrowed behind bifocals that gave her all the menace of a librarian with a grudge. "There has been a violation of..." She held up her clipboard like it was the 10 Commandments. HOA Regulation 4.7b, Vehicular Positioning and Property Line Encroachment. Your wife's vehicle was parked in such a way that the rear end extended into the street-facing area. I blinked. "You mean our driveway?" She nodded solemnly, like I'd just confessed to tax fraud. "Yes, the aesthetic integrity of this neighborhood depends on strict compliance. That vehicle was visually polluting." "Visual pollution?" I repeated, nearly spilling my coffee. "The regulation is quite clear," she insisted. "Any portion of a vehicle extending beyond the boundaries of a residential driveway may create a hazard and is therefore a violation." The rear bumper was protruding by approximately. She flipped to a page, 6 3/8 inches. I measured. "Of course you did." I tried logic. "But Maggie, the car was on our property. That's our driveway. That's what driveways are for. Not if they disrupt the visual harmony," she snapped. "We have standards." This was a woman who once submitted a formal complaint because someone's birdbath had excessive whimsy. I wish I were kidding. I took a deep breath and tried to remain the level-headed adult in the conversation. "All right, and what do you propose we do about this violation of visual harmony?" Her eyes gleamed. "First, a formal warning. Second, a $50 fine for each subsequent incident. Third, failure to comply will result in a hearing before the HOA board. And if necessary, a lien may be placed on your property." I nearly choked. A lien? Over a bumper. Her expression didn't change. HOA authority is legally binding. Ignoring it could result in significant legal consequences. And that, my friends, was the moment it all shifted. Because Maggie made a critical miscalculation. She assumed we were just another suburban couple too polite or too busy to push back. She assumed state attorney was a cute little job title my wife used to spice up her LinkedIn page. She assumed a clipboard gave her the power to trample common sense. She assumed wrong. Well, Maggie, I said with a bright smile, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'll let Sarah know right away. I'm sure she'll be fascinated by your interpretation of 4.7b. Oh, I hope she takes it seriously, Maggie sniffed. We don't want this to escalate. I smiled wider. Neither do we. As she retreated back to her house, clipboard tucked under her arm like she'd just delivered a legal bombshell, I sent Sarah a text. Me, Maggie's losing it over your bumper. She's threatening a fine. Sarah, LOL. Should I start preparing the indictment now, or wait until she tries to serve me? And just like that, the storm began to swirl. By the time Maggie marched back to her house, presumably to file the sacred documentation of our vehicular sins, I was already planning my next move, staying calm. Because when you're dealing with someone who uses the term visual pollution in a sentence without irony, the only winning move is to let them trip over their own delusions. I sent Sarah a screenshot of Regulation 4.7b from the HOA Covenant, which, and I quote, says, driveways should remain free of obstruction to maintain neighborhood appearance. Vague enough to mean anything. Perfect for someone like Maggie, who viewed ambiguity the same way a pirate views international waters, as an invitation to do whatever the hell she wanted. Around lunchtime, I peeked out the window, and sure enough, Maggie was doing her daily patrol. This was not a figure of speech. Maggie actually strutted around the neighborhood like a middle manager on an ego trip. Clipboard in hand, chin up, eyes squinting at mailbox heights, paint colors, and, on this fine Tuesday, driveways. Our driveway had officially been labeled Zone Red. She paused in front of it like a general surveying a battlefield, writing feverishly. Maybe she was drawing schematics. Maybe she was doodling me behind bars. Who's to say? I watched her go next door and chat with our neighbor Linda, who nodded a lot and gave me a sympathetic look. That was the thing about Maggie. People either feared her, tolerated her, or pretended she didn't exist. Nobody liked her. She was a human fine print clause. Around 2 p.m., she returned. Clipboard up, hair tight, blazer crisp, knocked like she was serving a warrant. I opened the door just enough to keep my dignity. Afternoon, Maggie. Back so soon. I've prepared a preliminary citation, she said, holding out a stapled packet of documents as though handing over a radioactive sample. You'll find the details of the violation outlined in Exhibit A, along with photographic evidence and the applicable regulation. It was printed on heavy stock paper and smelled faintly of printer ink and misplaced confidence. She'd even highlighted the key clauses in neon yellow. You highlighted the regulation about fence height, I pointed out. Ah, she said, clearly flustered for a half-second before recovering. That's a typographical alignment error. I'm sure it is. I flipped through the packet. She'd attached a blurry photo of Sarah's car taken from across the street. It looked like something off a ghost hunting show. I didn't have the heart to tell her her finger was covering half the lens. Maggie, I'm curious. How exactly did you measure the rear overhang of the car? I carry a measuring tape, she said, with the same tone someone might use to say, I keep a revolver under my pillow. Right? Naturally. Her voice dropped into a stern octave. Your noncompliance is noted. If this behavior persists, we'll be forced to escalate enforcement measures. Maggie, I said, fighting the urge to laugh, it's a Honda Civic. It's not even aggressive looking. It's about principle, she snapped. If we allow slackness, the entire neighborhood suffers. First it's a bumper, next it's unapproved flag displays and inflatable Santas. That was when I knew she'd fully detached from reality. Maggie wasn't protecting a neighborhood. She was waging a holy war against entropy. You know what? I said, folding the citation and slipping it into my hoodie pocket. Why don't you go ahead and formalize this? I mean, really go all the way. Make it a whole case file. Sarah's going to love this. She narrowed her eyes. You think this is a joke? No, I think this is a gift. You've taken a boring Tuesday and made it into a live-action drama. And I, for one, am here for it. She turned on her heel and stormed off with such theatrical indignation. I half expected background music to start playing. Probably a marching band version of Ride of the Valkyries. I closed the door, chuckling, and sat down to compose a text to Sarah. Maggie served us a citation. 3 pages. She highlighted the wrong regulation and cited a blurry photo of your bumper. Sarah, oh no, not Exhibit A. Guess I'll have to cancel my job and go straight to jail. Your sarcasm is showing. Sarah, I'm keeping it on display. It's an HOA emergency, after all. By dinner, the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing. Maggie had apparently warned 2 other residents about potential violations just that morning. Mr. Rodriguez was cited for improperly stored tools. Mrs. Kim was accused of leaving wind chimes on her porch that created a non-regulation auditory environment. No, I'm not joking. This woman cited someone for wind chimes. The thing was, Maggie wasn't stupid. She knew just enough about the rules to sound convincing, and most people didn't bother to argue. They just paid the fine or apologized to avoid the hassle. But what Maggie didn't know, what she was about to learn in spectacular fashion, was that when you bluff with bad cards, you better pray no one at the table knows how to play. And unfortunately for her, my wife is very, very good at cards. That evening, as promised, because Maggie takes her neighborhood dictatorship very seriously, she delivered what she called a formal notice of violation. And by delivered, I mean she stomped up to our porch at exactly 6:47 p.m., timestamp confirmed via our doorbell camera, and slapped a manila envelope against the door like she was serving a summons on an episode of Judge Judy, HOA edition. I opened the door to find her standing there in her finest authoritarian uniform, pressed khakis, HOA-branded pin on her lapel. Yes, those exist. And a look that screamed, I've memorized the rulebook and I'm not afraid to misuse it. This is your formal citation packet, she declared, holding it out like it might explode if mishandled. You are hereby required to acknowledge receipt within 72 hours and respond in accordance with Section 9.3 of the HOA Covenant. Section 9.3, I said, accepting the envelope with all the solemnity she was clearly craving. That's the one about ducks? No, she snapped. That's 11.2. Section 9.3 pertains to dispute resolution. Of course. My mistake. She stared at me like I was a toddler who'd wandered into traffic, then turned on her heel and retreated across the lawn, presumably to write more citations before bedtime. I brought the envelope inside and laid it on the table like it might contain anthrax. Sarah came home an hour later, dropped her briefcase, kicked off her heels, and said, Okay, let's see what this week's episode of Karen, Judge, Jury, and Clipboard has to offer. We opened it together. 3 pages. Single-spaced. Written in a font that was trying way too hard to be intimidating. Maggie had titled it, Notice of Parking Infraction, Hartwell v. Mitchell. Yes, she named it like it was an actual court case. I half expected a gavel to fall out. Sarah snorted by the end of the second paragraph. She spelled violation wrong in the header. She also listed our address as 247 Maple Street. We live at 274. And look, Regulation 4.7b again. But here it says it applies to fence height, not parking. Sarah stared at the document like it had personally insulted her law degree. This reads like someone Googled how to write legal documents and got bored halfway through the first blog post. To be fair, I said, she did include a bibliography. Oh, yes, Sarah replied dryly, citing an HOA dispute in Peoria, Illinois as precedent. Very compelling. She read the last page, then sat back with that familiar glint in her eye. The same one I'd seen right before she made a white-collar fraud defendant cry on the witness stand. This is actually impressive. She's managed to cram in threats of legal action, law enforcement involvement, and a vague reference to criminal liability, all based on a car bumper. Ambitious, right? No, reckless. She stood up and began pacing, citation still in hand. She's crossed into a whole new realm of legal stupidity. You think this qualifies as harassment? Oh, I'm not thinking anymore. I'm sure. She held up the packet. This is written evidence. She's threatening us with false enforcement actions using a fabricated interpretation of HOA rules, all to intimidate us into compliance. And that's bad. Sarah gave me a look. That's actionable, civilly and possibly criminally, depending on how much she's been doing this to other neighbors. There was a long pause, during which I slowly reached for the popcorn bowl we keep on the kitchen counter. So, what do we do? I asked. Sarah smiled. We give her exactly what she asked for. Documentation. A response. A glorious, legally airtight response that will make her wish she'd just filed a noise complaint like a normal person. The next morning, while most people were starting their day with coffee and Wordle, Sarah was printing regulations, highlighting statutes, and opening tabs like she was prepping for the final round of a televised legal debate. She'd gone full courtroom mode, sleeves rolled up, hair in a bun, a look of deadly focus on her face. You're enjoying this, I said, handing her a fresh cup of coffee. I haven't had this much fun since that guy tried to argue that bankruptcy protected him from alimony. She replied without looking up. Should I be worried about how happy you are? Only if you're Maggie. By mid-morning, I watched Maggie strut down the street again on patrol, armed with a fresh stack of what I could only assume were new violations. Probably targeting Halloween decorations or unauthorized garden gnomes. She waved at a few neighbors who nodded back the way one does when trying to avoid being added to a list. And then my phone buzzed. Sarah, done drafting. It's a thing of beauty. Me, should we frame it? Sarah, no. We're going to deliver it. She printed it on thick, cream-colored legal stock. Bound it with a clip. Even included a cover page titled, Response to Allegation of Improper Vehicle Parking and Threatened HOA Enforcement Action. Classic Sarah, snarky, surgical, and legally devastating. I hand-delivered it myself. Maggie answered the door in a lavender bathrobe with a smear of what I think was peanut butter on her cheek. Clearly, she wasn't expecting me. What do you want? She asked, like I'd wandered off my assigned sidewalk square. I handed her the packet. Just returning the favor. This is our formal response to your formal complaint. Sarah thought it was important to follow procedure. Her eyes narrowed as she took it. I assume this is a denial? Oh no, I said with a smile. It's an education. As I turned to leave, I heard her flipping pages. The confused hum, followed by a small gasp, was the sweetest music I'd heard all week. That night, Sarah came home and told me Maggie had actually tried calling her office. She called you. She asked to speak to someone in authority about our violation. What did you say? I said I was the authority. And I offered to schedule a meeting. Her, me, and a few colleagues from the Attorney General's office. Maybe someone from corporate compliance. You know, just to clear things up. And how'd she take that? Sarah grinned. She hung up. You know that moment in a movie where the villain realizes they picked the wrong person to mess with? That was Wednesday morning. 8:17 a.m., the precise minute Sarah slammed her laptop shut with the righteous satisfaction of a woman who just connected all the dots and lit them on fire. I did some digging, she said, setting down her coffee with the calm of someone about to dismantle a small government. And Maggie? Maggie's not just annoying. She's illegal. I sat down slowly, because when Sarah starts sentences like that, it usually ends with someone crying in a suit. Illegal how? I asked. Where do I start? She spun the laptop around to show me a collection of PDFs and scanned documents that looked like they belonged in a courtroom drama. First, let's talk about the regulations. Remember 4.7b? That's not even about parking. It's about mailbox placement. Of course it is. The actual parking rules are in section 6.3a, which clearly states, and I quote, vehicles parked entirely on the homeowner's property are exempt from HOA oversight. So, Maggie's citation was basically a Mad Lib with legal terms. Oh, it gets better. Or worse, depending on how you feel about institutional incompetence. She pulled up another file. Maggie's been president of the HOA for 3 years, right? 3 very long, clipboard-heavy years. She was never actually elected. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? She stepped in as interim president after the last guy moved to Florida, and she never held the mandatory special election. HOA bylaws require a vote within 90 days. It's been 1,097 days. I nearly choked on my toast. So she's a fake president? She's a squat ruler. A clipboard-wielding usurper. A suburban warlord with delusions of legality. Sarah clicked to another document. And she hasn't just skipped elections. The HOA has failed to file any of the annual reports with the state for the past 3 years. No financial disclosures, no meeting minutes, no record of member votes. They're operating without legal standing. So, legally speaking, the HOA is just a group of bored people yelling at mailboxes? Sarah smiled. More like a rogue operation pretending to be legitimate governance. That alone would have been enough to ruin Maggie's week. But oh no, Sarah wasn't done. I called the state attorney general's office to verify a few things, and turns out, we're not alone. In the past 2 years, there have been 17 formal complaints filed against HOAs in our county. 12 of them. Maple Grove Estates. Wait, 12? Out of 17. Maggie's been busy. Improper fines. Harassment. Denial of due process. There's even an open investigation into the HOA's practices. I leaned back in my chair. So when she threatened us with law enforcement, she threatened us with law enforcement while under investigation for illegal enforcement tactics. It's like a thief calling the cops on someone else for shoplifting. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table like a war general laying out a battle map. She drafted a formal response, 4 pages long, referenced the correct statutes, and included a footnote so scathing it could have blistered drywall. This reads like a velvet-gloved slap to the face, I said, watching her underline a key passage. That's the idea. The next morning, I walked across the street and rang Maggie's doorbell. She answered in her robe, clearly not expecting a visitor who wasn't holding a baby deer or a casserole. "Oh," she said flatly. "Just dropping off our official response," I said cheerfully, handing her the sealed envelope. Sarah thought it'd be best to follow the proper protocol. Maggie's eyes lit up like she'd just been handed proof of alien life. "It's about time you people took this seriously. I trust you'll be more compliant moving forward." "Oh, we're taking it very seriously," I assured her. "In fact, Sarah's so impressed by your dedication to documentation, she's decided to get more involved in HOA matters." Maggie's smile faltered. "More involved how?" "She's got some ideas about elections. And compliance. And legal governance, generally." Maggie nodded slowly, like she was trying to compute a new kind of math. Good. Good. We need more people who respect the rules." I smiled and walked back to our house. My phone buzzed the moment I stepped inside. "Sarah, did you deliver it?" "Me." She looked thrilled. "She may frame it." "Sarah?" "Oh, she'll want to burn it once she reads the part about civil liability." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Hi, honey," Sarah said, not even trying to hide her glee. "Guess who just called my office?" "Let me guess." Desperate, slightly breathless voice. A little shaky. "Bingo." She demanded to speak with someone about the Mitchell household's noncompliance. So my secretary patched her through. And I told her I'd be happy to arrange a meeting. Her, me, and a couple of interested parties from the Attorney General's office and the Department of Consumer Affairs. There was a pause, then, "Honey, I think Maggie might be about to have a very, very bad day." Saturday arrived with the kind of sunshine that made you want to believe in good things. Lemonade stands, backyard cookouts, neighbors who don't threaten to file liens over parking. Unfortunately, our HOA had Maggie. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. at the Maple Grove Estates Community Center, a building that smelled faintly of old printer ink and broken dreams. Sarah had suggested the location herself, pitching it as a neutral venue for constructive dialogue. Translation: the perfect stage for a public dismantling. I arrived 15 minutes early, just in time to see Maggie holding court near the folding chairs. She'd rallied her inner circle, the HOA's version of the Knights of the Round Clipboard. 3 women in matching blazers and frosted hair, all glaring at me like I'd keyed the Declaration of Independence. "Where's your wife?" Maggie asked, arms crossed like she was checking roll call at Tyrant Camp. "She's on her way," I said, taking a seat, and pulling out my phone. She had a few last-minute things at the office. One of Maggie's minions, Cheryl, I think, leaned in and asked, "Oh, what kind of work does she do again?" "Legal," I said casually. "She's with the state attorney's office." There was a beat of silence. The kind where your ears feel hot, and you can hear someone's brain stutter. Maggie chuckled nervously. "Oh, that's cute." At exactly 2:03 p.m., the doors opened. Sarah walked in like a prosecutor entering court, calm, confident, organized. But she wasn't alone. Following her were two people who clearly hadn't come for the juice boxes. The first was a sharply dressed man in a government-issue suit, briefcase in hand, and jaw clenched like a man who had read all the emails. The second was a woman who moved with quiet authority and carried a leather portfolio that practically glowed with compliance reports. Maggie blinked. "Who are?" Sarah smiled and introduced them like she was hosting a panel. "This is Assistant Attorney General Morrison, Consumer Protection Division. And this is Ms. Chun, Department of Corporate Compliance. They're here to observe." Maggie's jaw did a weird thing, somewhere between a clench and a collapse. "Why are they here?" "Well," Sarah said, sitting down at the head of the table, "when you called my office demanding legal action over a parking violation, the matter was escalated. It seems there's been a pattern of questionable enforcement actions in this HOA." Morrison opened his briefcase and produced a thick file. "Mrs. Hartwell, we've been trying to reach you for several months. There are several unresolved compliance issues that fall under state oversight." What? Maggie looked around. No support. Her clipboard suddenly looked like a very useless plank of wood. Ms. Chin calmly unzipped her case. Failure to file annual reports. Improper election procedures. Missing financial documentation. 17 homeowner complaints in 24 months. That's more than the rest of the county combined. "But this meeting is about their parking." "It was," Sarah said, "until you involved law enforcement over a bumper. So now, we're talking about the HOA's legal status. And yours." She slid a document across the table. "This is the actual regulation on parking. Section 6.3a. It clearly exempts vehicles parked entirely on private property." Then she pulled out another. "This is the clause that outlines proper board election procedures, highlighted, because you missed the deadline by 1,007 days. Morrison jumped in. "We've also flagged improper fine assessments and potential misuse of HOA funds. You'll need to provide access to all financial records immediately." Cheryl quietly closed her folder and scooted her chair back. Another minion muttered something about needing to feed her cat and practically sprinted out the door. Maggie sat frozen, clipboard clutched like a lifeline made of denial. Sarah leaned forward. "And just so we're clear, when you threatened us with law enforcement over fabricated charges, that crossed a line. It's not just harassment. It could be considered abuse of process. Possibly extortion." Maggie's face had gone from pink to red to something I can only describe as expired mayonnaise. "I didn't know who you were," she said weakly. Sarah tilted her head. "It wouldn't matter if I were a janitor or a jazz musician. Threatening criminal action over a legal parking job is not how governance works." Morrison stood. "You'll receive a formal request for documents by Monday. If we don't get full cooperation, we'll subpoena them. And if the audit reveals misuse of funds," Ms. Chin added, "personal liability may be involved." It was the most satisfying silence I've ever experienced. As the officials packed up, Sarah gathered her materials and stood. Maggie hadn't moved. She just stared at the table like the laminate pattern held the answers to life. "Maggie," Sarah said gently, "do yourself a favor. Step back. Let the professionals clean this up before it gets worse." "What happens to me now?" she asked, barely audible. "That depends," Sarah replied. "Cooperate, correct your mistakes, and maybe walk away with your clipboard dignity intact. Keep pushing, and you might need your own lawyer." As we walked back to the car, I turned to Sarah. "So, that was a subtle response." "Subtle is overrated," she said, opening the car door. "Sometimes you need to remind people that power without accountability isn't power. It's bullying. And what do you call what you just did?" She smiled. "Justice, with a side of paperwork." If Maggie thought the meeting at the community center was rock bottom, she was in for a rude awakening. Because as it turns out, the only thing faster than government paperwork when it's working against you is a neighborhood gossip chain fueled by petty revenge and HOA trauma. By Monday morning, Maggie's reign of passive-aggressive terror had officially entered the panic mode phase. It started with the emails. Dozens of them. Neighbors writing in about fines they'd paid, citations they'd received, threatening letters that mysteriously never had a return address, but always came printed on full letterhead and smelled faintly of lavender and rage. Mrs. Patterson, sweet little 84-year-old with a gnome obsession, came forward with 6 separate notices she'd received for excessive ornamental whimsy. "I thought she was just trying to help me declutter," she said when Sarah spoke with her. "Turns out I've been robbed. Emotionally. And possibly financially." Then came the walk-ups. Mr. Johnson from 2 streets over showed up on our porch with a manila folder that looked like it had seen combat. Inside, detailed records of every interaction he'd had with Maggie. Photos, letters, receipts, even a hand-drawn diagram of the time she tried to find him for repainting his mailbox dark blue instead of approved earth tone. She said it disrupted visual consistency, he explained. I told her it was Navy. She said Navy was aggressive. By noon, Sarah's email inbox looked like a war crimes tribunal for suburban violations. The stories ranged from hilarious to horrifying. Unauthorized pumpkins, improper mulch depth, unregistered flower boxes. One guy had been fined for putting out 2 American flags on the 4th of July. She told me it was political grandstanding, he said. On Independence Day? Yep. By Tuesday, the Department of Consumer Affairs had officially launched an audit. The HOA's finances, such as they were now under state scrutiny. Maggie had been operating with all the fiscal transparency of a sock puppet. No receipts. No budget reports. No record of where the fines were going. Just a community fund that mysteriously dwindled even as enforcement efforts ramped up. And then came the discovery. Sarah called me from her office late Tuesday afternoon. I could hear the tension in her voice and the thrill. They found it, she said. The bank account. Whose? Hers. Maggie's been siphoning off HOA funds into a private account, one that's not listed in the organization's financials. They've got deposit records, transfers, the works. How much? $37,000. Over 3 years. That's more than enough for criminal charges. Holy crap. She's not just a clipboard tyrant. She's an embezzling clipboard tyrant. On Wednesday morning, the forensic accountant showed up. I watched from our window as a sharply dressed man took photos of Maggie's property. Her car, her house, even her mailbox, perhaps out of sheer poetic spite. She came out screaming. "You can't do this," she yelled, barefoot on her lawn, hair wild, bathrobe flapping like a tragic cape. "This is harassment. This is illegal." The man calmly replied, "Ma'am, this is a court-ordered asset assessment. If you have questions, your attorney can contact the Consumer Protection Division." Asset assessment? What assets? Why my assets? It was like watching someone realize, in real time, that the clipboard she'd clung to for years was not, in fact, a shield. Thursday brought the final, humiliating blow. A for sale sign popped up in Maggie's front yard. Not the fancy kind with staged photos and QR codes. No, this was a desperate quick sale job, slapped together by someone who needed liquidity and needed it yesterday. I was out getting the mail when Maggie appeared on our porch. Gone was the blazer. Gone was the blowout. She looked 10 years older, dressed in sweatpants and a wrinkled HOA volunteer shirt that now felt less like a badge of honor and more like a uniform for a failed regime. "I need to talk to your wife," she said, eyes sunken, voice hoarse. "She's not home yet," I replied, watching her closely. "Can I help you?" She hesitated. "I need to know what I have to do to make this stop." There was a long silence. I didn't fill it. I just let her stand there, face stripped of smugness, arms hanging loose, clipboard nowhere in sight. She wasn't issuing citations anymore. She was just a person, and for the first time, she looked like she knew it. "I'm not a lawyer," I said finally. "But I think step 1 is admitting you screwed up. Step 2? Get your own legal counsel. And step 3? What?" Hope Sarah's in a generous mood. She looked down. I thought I was helping the neighborhood. No, you were controlling it. And there's a difference. Maggie nodded, turned slowly, and shuffled back across the street. The woman who once lectured us on hedge height and driveway compliance now had the gait of someone walking away from the ashes of her own ego. Inside, I sat down with my coffee and stared out the window. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, free, at least for now. By Friday, the neighborhood had become less peaceful suburb and more courtroom lobby with excellent landscaping. The audit was public knowledge, and Maggie's clipboard lost whatever magic powers it once had. Turns out, fear doesn't survive sunlight or subpoenas. It started at 9:03 a.m. with Mr. Johnson. He showed up at our front door with a tight smile and a folder thick enough to qualify as a weapon. "I thought Sarah might want to see this," he said, holding it out. Inside, a goldmine. Letters, emails, HOA violation notices, all signed by Maggie, all issued over the past year. He'd been fined for an unauthorized garden gnome, seasonal overlighting, and once, for putting his garbage cans out 20 minutes early. "She charged me $75 for excessive bin visibility," he said, eyes narrowing. "But her friend 3 houses down had a trampoline on the front lawn for 6 weeks and never got so much as a warning." "You paid the fines?" I didn't feel like I had a choice. "She threatened to lien our house." "Oh, don't worry," I said, flipping through the absurdly detailed documentation. "You'll be getting that money back. And probably an apology written on very fancy government letterhead." By lunchtime, 6 more neighbors had stopped by. Mrs. Kim had been fined for hanging wind chimes that made disturbing tonal patterns. The Rodriguezes were cited for their basketball hoop being too sporty. Even Mr. Granger, who hadn't spoken more than 5 words to anyone since the Bush administration, came forward with a citation for non-compliant patio furniture. "He has a plastic flamingo. It's adorable." Then there was Mrs. Patterson, 84, 4 feet 10 inches of absolute legend. She rang our bell with a grin and handed Sarah a small box. "Thought you might like these," she said. Inside, photocopies of every HOA notice Maggie had ever sent her, 32 in total, each one more absurd than the last. "She fined me for aesthetic disruption because of my gnomes," she said. But then her nephew left an old sofa in his driveway for 2 weeks, and she called it artistic rusticity. Sarah examined one of the letters. She spelled gnome wrong. She also misspelled enforcement 3 times, and once referred to herself as Heritage President of Maple Grove, with no R. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You've been documenting all this?" "I'm old. I don't sleep much. Filing complaints keeps me sharp." By mid-afternoon, Sarah's inbox had so many attachments it started lagging. The neighborhood had been simmering for years. Maggie's clipboard wasn't just a nuisance. It had been a cudgel. She'd fined people into silence, enforced imaginary rules, and fabricated citations with the confidence of a high schooler playing lawyer in a school play. Now, that silence was over. The audit team returned Friday evening. This time, they brought more people. We watched from our porch as 3 cars pulled up in front of Maggie's house. 2 auditors, 1 investigator, and a man with a camera who looked exactly like someone who uses the word deposition before breakfast. Maggie came out in sweats and slippers. She didn't scream this time. She didn't argue. She just stood there while the investigators photographed her front yard, garage, and mailbox. Sarah leaned on the railing. "They're building a timeline." "Of what?" "Misuse of funds, illegal enforcement, possibly tax fraud." Maggie's sloppy, but she's been collecting money, and if any of that went unreported, she's done. Sarah took a sip of wine. She's cooked, overseasoned, burnt to a crisp. Saturday morning brought the cherry on top. As we were eating breakfast, a very official-looking envelope slid through our mail slot. Sarah picked it up, opened it, and smiled. "Restitution process has begun," she said, holding it up. "Residents will be reimbursed for any fines collected improperly. And there's going to be a public town hall next week. State representatives are attending. And elections are scheduled for the following month. Elections? Real ones. With ballots. And rules. And without Maggie's clipboard. At noon, A white van rolled through the neighborhood with forensic accounting and consulting stenciled on the side. They weren't just investigating, they were documenting. Every payment, every check, every dollar Maggie had collected over the past 3 years. HOA funds, fines, event dues, even money raised from bake sales. Turns out, Maggie had dipped into every fund she could get her hands on. Christmas light contest proceeds? Gone. Pool maintenance budget? Mia, the community newsletter printing fund? Redirected for strategic HOA expenditures, aka her Amazon account. Sarah, of course, had already filed a preliminary civil complaint against Maggie on behalf of a small group of neighbors. And the word was out. Maggie wasn't just an obnoxious authority figure. She was a one-woman corruption engine. Friday night, we had impromptu drinks with our neighbors on the sidewalk. Lawn chairs were set up. Wine was passed around. Someone brought cookies. It felt like a neighborhood again. Mr. Johnson raised a toast. To Sarah, for defending our driveways. Mrs. Patterson chimed in. And for liberating the gnomes. Everyone laughed. Even the flamingo got a little plastic high five. For the first time in years, people weren't whispering. They were sharing. About fines they never questioned. About citations that never made sense. About how they were too scared or too tired to fight. Until someone finally stood up and said, "Not today, clipboard queen." And just like that, the dominoes kept falling. By Monday, the HOA was no longer an organization. It was a crime scene wrapped in red tape and quiet embarrassment. The audit was ongoing, the financial freeze in place, and Maggie? Well, Maggie had gone quiet. Not the quiet of a dignified retreat. The quiet of someone who's realized the cavalry wasn't coming and the moat was made of receipts. Her house, once the command center of suburban oppression, now looked like it was waiting for a foreclosure notice. The for sale sign out front had been upgraded with a bright red, price-reduced sticker. Poetic, really. Tuesday morning, a knock came at our door. Sarah opened it to find Maggie standing there, holding something in her hands. A white envelope. No clipboard. "Can I speak with you?" Maggie asked, voice flat, like someone reading from a script they didn't believe in. Sarah didn't invite her in, just leaned on the doorframe and waited. "I've been advised," Maggie began, "to offer a formal apology. To you, and your husband, and anyone else who was upset by my leadership." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Upset. I didn't realize some of the policies I enforced were, technically, not enforceable. Technically. Maggie paused. Her lip twitched. Fine. They were fabricated. Improper. Illegal. Whatever. Sarah nodded slowly. And the funds? I've agreed to restitution. I've signed the order. The state is managing the repayment. Sarah took the envelope and opened it. Inside, a typed apology. Generic. Legal sounding. The kind of thing you send to a judge, not a neighbor. But it was something. And your position? I've resigned, Maggie muttered. Effective immediately. I've been barred from holding any HOA office again. That's the most community-friendly thing you've ever done. Maggie didn't argue. She just stood there, awkward and humiliated, the shell of a person who'd once marched down the street like she owned it. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then said, "I hope you learned something from this, Maggie. About power, and consequences, and the danger of confusing a clipboard with the Constitution." Maggie turned and walked away. Later that afternoon, Sarah forwarded the apology to the neighbors. By dinner time, it had been shared, screenshotted, and gleefully dissected by everyone in Maple Grove Estates. Mr. Rodriguez printed it out and pinned it to the community bulletin board with the caption, "The Empire Falls." Mrs. Patterson stuck a copy on her mailbox, right next to her newest gnome. That evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset, the air finally free of petty rules and surveillance. "So," I said, nudging Sarah, "how's it feel, being the suburban hero?" She shrugged, sipping her wine. "Honestly, satisfying, but exhausting. I didn't think I'd be using my law degree to fight HOA corruption in the suburbs. And yet here we are. It was never about the parking," she said. "It was about someone thinking they could bully a community into submission. About power unchecked." I grinned. "And now that power's in foreclosure." She laughed. "Let that be a lesson. Don't start legal drama with someone who keeps the state statute book on their nightstand. And what about the HOA? They're forming a new board. Transparent, elected, with term limits. And actual accountants. Will you run? She gave me a look that said, absolutely not. I've done my time. Let someone else carry the clipboard now. Retiring undefeated, huh? She clinked her glass against mine. Exactly. And just like that, Maple Grove Estates was peaceful again. No citations. No threats. Just neighbors. Lawns. The occasional gnome uprising. The clipboard? Rumor has it Maggie tried to donate it to the HOA archive. No one accepted it. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.